Hi, everybody, and welcome to another one of UIC's webinars. We're really pleased to see everybody here. This is part of our series of webinars that are occurring weekly on Wednesdays at this time, and we'll go through mid-May. Now, let me introduce myself. My name is Christine Park, and I'm the director of the Simulation and Integrative Learning Institute here in Chicago. And we're really excited to be presenting for you today. So, few facts about us. We are at the University of Illinois College of Medicine in Chicago. We just moved last fall into a 28,000 square foot facility, and we house both human-based simulation and technology-based simulation as one integrated operation. We did about 33,000 learner hours last year, and we have a 16-member staff admin team. We have an assistant director of human-based simulation, and we're in the process of finding somebody to be the assistant director of technology-based simulation. And we have over 110 standardized patient actors who work with us. So this is our wonderful staff. Perhaps some of you may have seen some of us on previous webinars. You will see more of us today. We hope you are going to have a great time. Now, Bob, I wonder if you can help me go back.
Sure.
Great. So the focus of today's webinar is going to be a little bit different in that it came from a strategic planning place. As many of us are in the day-to-day survival mode, we have to face the reality that come summertime-ish, we're going to be facing a huge deluge of demand, both to catch up and to continue what is usually done. And here at UIC, we have to face the reality of our HR, which is the state of Illinois, and it takes a long time to process people. So we really felt that we needed to find a way to keep the trains moving, even if the trains weren't moving that fast. And we really thought, what do we have to lose over trying to audition SPs in a different way than we usually do, which is involving an in-person component. So we wanted to see, could we pull this off? And what we're going to share with you today is the story of that journey. And from here, I'm going to pass it off to Bob.
Great. Thank you, Christine, and hi, everybody. So first of all, it's good to see everybody out there. And let me make one adjustment in my screen there. So first of all, let's start off with some objectives. So today we are hoping that after this webinar, you'll be able to determine skills in effectively auditioning SPs in a telesim environment. And also, you'll be able to utilize and integrate Zoom logistics to facilitate a Zoom audition. In other words, as I help my screen, the agenda for today is pretty simple. We want to let you know kind of what our pre-COVID-19 process was for auditioning SPs. Then we're going to talk about the modifications implemented for the tele-auditions. Then we're going to talk about the rewards and challenges of this whole thing we did. And then what our thoughts are on moving forward, what we want to keep, and maybe what we want to rethink. Also, today, if you have a question that you want to ask, please put it in the Q&A part of this. You'll find that button at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to use the chat, but we won't really be looking at that as much as the Q&A, and that's where we will draw from to answer questions. So let's get going. So with that in mind, we want to do a poll to kind of see where you are at. So this is what we want to know. By what means do you usually interview SPs? And please choose all that apply. So feel free to enter those in. I'm seeing a lot come in. So auditions, a lot. That's great. Group interviews. Seems like those are winning right now. We have done group interviews and we have done auditions, obviously, since that's what we're talking about today. So we're almost there. We're at about 75% of the people voted. So feel free to get those last minute votes in. We'll give you about 2 more seconds to get those in. Great. So I'm gonna go and close the poll. I'll give everyone just 1 more second. Okay, we're gonna end the poll and look at the results. So interesting that most people are auditioning in person, which is obviously what we do. Group interviews, a close second. We did do that also. We went from just group interviews to auditions. Obviously, you could choose more than one, so maybe people are doing group interviews and auditions. I don't know. And the phone interview, and then 8% are doing Skype and Zoom interviews. I would love to hear more about that later on in the program from these people, especially if that's just a part of the hiring process or if that is your entire hiring process. So thank you. Let me get rid of my poll. And so I think in order for us to talk about the modifications that we made, that you kind of need to know about our program to see what exactly we do for auditions. So when we came up with this process, we formerly were doing group interviews and realized that that was not probably the most effective way for us to figure out exactly who did we want to hire for our team, for those SPs. And we realized that SPs have a very particular skill set. So our question for us, question for the team was, how do we create an audition, create a exam, if you will, that will allow us to allow those skills to come out so we can see who we want to hire. So these are the questions we asked ourselves. So we wanted to check on their accountability. We wanted to check on their writing ability. Could they memorize? What about consistent portrayals? Oh, and also the ability to immediately implement feedback was a huge one for us at the time. And also just in general, their verbal communication. So with all of these, as the questions we posed to ourselves, this is how we answered them. So for the accountability, we have several places at the beginning of the process that we give the applicants due dates for their application, due dates for audition sign-up. And if they don't make these due dates, then that's a pretty good sign to us that maybe their accountability is not the strongest. So if they don't make the due dates, then they do not move on in the process. The second thing was the writing ability. This is pretty easy. So we just asked them for a writing sample. We asked them to tell us about an instructor, a teacher that they found that was effective, that inspired them. Just a very simple paragraph, no more than 300 words. And we also gave them a due date, again, for the accountability part. For the memorization, well, we gave them a case. So we created a very simple case. It was a cat allergy case. And again, asking them to do two things. One was that they had an opening statement that they had to memorize verbatim. They also had facts of the case that they had to answer, as we all do with students when questions were asked. The other thing was consistent portrayal of the case. So we thought, well, in order to evaluate consistency, they need to do it more than once. So each applicant gets the opportunity to do it twice. As a side note, that is my devil cat, Melina. I thought she wanted to make an appearance today. So she's very cute, just mean. Anyway, I digress. So with these two encounters, we found this really effective also for people who've never done SP work before. We really looked for, was there a change from their first encounter to the second encounter? Ability to immediately implement feedback. So for us, this was really important. As all of us know in this field, it's very fast paced and faculty can make a change very quickly and we need to implement that. So during these auditions, between the first encounter and the second encounter, we gave standardized feedback, which included giving an additional symptom. With this symptom, we gave, it was red bumps on the stomach that had been there for 1 week. So red bumps starting last week. As a side note, what we did not tell them was if they were itchy or not. So we wanted to see if they would just give the information provided, which I'll explain a little bit more about that in a second. The last thing is verbal communication. So can they communicate? So we did two things. We asked actually a couple of standardized interviewing questions that HR provided to us. And we also asked them to evaluate their assessors, which were the coordinators or seasoned SPs who act as standardized examinees, to evaluate us on how it felt to be our patient. So could they say, I felt annoyed, I felt comfortable, etc. So I think this is probably most of what everyone is doing, but this is our process. So the last thing is that we created checklists to standardize our assessment. So this is just an example of one part of our checklist. Again, the opening statement, we asked them to have that verbatim. So was it verbatim? Case information accuracy, etc. we wanted to take out the subjectivity of our assessments. So this is one way we did that. So with all of those elements, I think it's important for me to talk about what was the process, because this is going to carry us into the next part of the presentation. So obviously in person, the applicants would arrive the day of the auditions and they'd get a quick orientation, basically introduction to who the team was and also the schedule for the day, what they could expect. Then we took them through a standardized training. In this, we gave them portrayal expectations. And let me back up 1 second. When I mean standardized training, this means that we as coordinators have a checklist for anybody who does the training. So I could do the training, or maybe Laura or Alba. Anyone can go in and we can make sure that the applicants got the exact same training. So in this, we did portrayal expectations. Another thing is to answer the question asked. And the other thing is, if they didn't have the answer, they were to answer no, or I don't know. And that plays into the to the added symptom. So we gave them the information of the red bumps on the stomach for a week. During the second encounter, we actually asked them, so after they give us the symptom, we say, oh, so are those red bumps itchy? And the correct answer is no, because we did not tell them that. But that's one way we assess that. Moving on, they get 2 mock encounters, as I mentioned before. So they portray the case for 2 different assessors, so that we have 2 different checklists on them. And obviously, as I said, we use the checklist assessment tools. In our process, there are 4 places that the applicant is assessed. During the training with the trainer, who in best case scenario is not one of the assessors during the mock encounters. So the trainer will assess the applicants. Obviously during the 2 mock encounters. The last one is the tour of the center. This is an informal evaluation of the group interactions. So for the training and the tour of the center, there are not checklists. These are just basic gut instincts and kind of observations, but the 2 mock encounters do have checklist assessment tools. The last part is the group debriefing. So we explain how the HR process works, and as Christine said before, it is quite long and has many steps, so we warn the applicants about this. And then we answer their questions. What do they want to know about the job? So looking at this process real quickly, take a couple seconds and think to yourself, what parts would be easy to do virtually? And what parts are you thinking, well, I wonder how they did that part? So obviously, I think a group debriefing, we've been using Zoom, for meetings. So I could see that working, but the mock encounters, interesting. I wonder how we'll do that with Zoom, even though many of us have already been doing the standardized patient encounters this way. So, so with this process in place, kind of going back to what Christine had said, we had planned to do these auditions in March. Little backstory is that we usually do our auditions in September, or actually summer. And when we do them in summer, HR every year says, why do you do this to us? We have so many people going through the system. And so this year we were being prepared. We thought, you know what, we're gonna do this in March. So we had everything planned. We were ready to go. We were ahead of the curve. And then COVID-19 hit. So yes, that's kind of where we were at. So before we go into the modifications we made, I have another question for you. And let me go ahead and launch this poll. We want to know about your hiring during COVID-19. So are you hiring now during this pandemic? So either yes, you're hiring now, no, or are you crazy? I can't even think about this right now. So go ahead and put those in. And I love that the last answer we were doing is kind of a joke, but you know what? It's already up to 12%. So maybe it wasn't that big of a joke. But I see the majority of you are not hiring during this pandemic, which I completely understand, but almost 20% are. So I'm gonna, after we vote, I'll deploy this. We have about 80% voted. I'll give you a couple more seconds. Great. Thank you. So I'm gonna end this poll and I'll show you the results. So as you can see, almost 20% are hiring now. But about 70% are not, which I completely get. And then there's 15% of you that just seemed overwhelmed, and I get that too. I get all of these answers. So thank you for that. As I get this out of my way. So as I mentioned, we had planned to do these in March to avoid the HR overload in summer. And then obviously we moved to our houses and worked from home, and we were like, wow, I don't think we can do this. And then someone said, what if we did virtual auditions? Now I'm gonna turn it over to Alba.
Hello, everyone. I'm Alba. And yeah, so what if we did do these auditions? We decided to jump in and give it a whirl. And so we did. This is what happened. So there are many platforms that you can use to do, to have virtual conversations. I know many people have tried different ones, and we chose Zoom specifically. Zoom has breakout rooms. I know WebEx does not have breakout rooms, but that was a really helpful tool in our continuing to be able to do this process. So we're going to explain how we did it through a handy dandy flow chart. So with Zoom, you can see at the bottom, we'll have arrows indicating the 4 different coordinators that, that worked on this, and then our potential SPs will be our green arrow. And at the very beginning of it, our potential SPs will start in the waiting room. They stayed in the waiting room, and then all of the coordinators started in the main meeting room there, and had our kind of our pre-brief, our making sure that we were all getting on the same page. And then once we were all on the same page, then we brought in the potential SPs into the main meeting room. And so that's where we had our initial orientation with the SPs, or with the potential SPs, and the training happens in that main meeting room. So once the training is done, then it's time to move into the breakout rooms for the initial encounters. So the SPs go into the breakout rooms, and the coordinators prepare themselves, and then the coordinators join those breakout rooms for their first encounter. So they have their encounter, and then once that is done, the potential SPs stay in that same breakout room, and just the coordinators come back to the main meeting room. So the coordinators come back to the main meeting room, confer, talk about what happened, fill out checklists. Once we were done doing that, then the coordinators would now go for the second encounter into a different breakout room. So if yellow coordinator went into 1, then yellow coordinator now goes into 2. So we just switched which rooms we're going to. So then we have our second encounter. When that second encounter is done, then the potential SPs go back into the waiting room. So the coordinator can, or the host or organizer can move the SPs back into that waiting room, and the 4 coordinators go back to the main meeting room. So back to the main meeting room, again, fill out checklists, confer, talk about what happened. And then once we were done with our second round of checklists, then all of the potential SPs are brought back into that main meeting room for our final Q&A and debriefing. So with that, I will kick it over to Laura McKenzie.
Hello, everyone. So this awesome flow chart that was created by Alba takes about 2.5 hours to get through. So what we did is we made a video to distill our process, into that 2.5 hour process, into about a 3-minute video to show you kind of from start to finish what that looks like. And while we get that video ready, I want to just answer a couple of questions. Someone asked how many people are in this session. And so I think that you're referring to how many people will be auditioning at once. So in the flow chart, we had 4 breakout rooms. We actually had 2 groups of people. So however many breakout rooms we have, 4 or maybe 5, I think the last round we did it, we had 5. We would double that. So we would have 10 people auditioning who would show up for that initial meet and greet training session. And then we would split them up into 2 groups. Half of the group would stay and do their 2 encounters, while the other half was told to return at a specific time. And then the second part would come, second group would come, we would do their encounters, and then they would all reconvene for that final Q&A session. Hopefully that answered your question. All right, Bob, how are we doing?
here we go.
So, you want to audition potential SPs, but you don't want to get COVID-19 doing it? All right then, let's get to Zooming. All you need to do is follow every single step on this super simple flowchart. It's just that easy. But why don't we take it from the top? Okay, so here we are in the main meeting room. I've gathered all of the coordinators who are going to be doing the interviews together, just so that we can have a quick pre-brief before we invite.
Yeah, real quick. How long are the encounters?
Well, the encounters are, roughly like about.
Where are the checklists?
The checklists are in learning space. Like.
Oh, and what am I supposed to do again?
Yeah, clearly we all need to get on the same page. All right, everyone. I'm so glad that you are here for the auditions today. So why don't we start with some introductions? Let's all introduce ourselves. Hi.
Hi.
Great, got that. Okay, let's move on. All right, so let's get started with this training session. So coordinators, you can go ahead and take a break for a few minutes. And potential SPs, what we're going to do is we're going to go over the facts of the case and go over what it is that we expect during an encounter. Sound good? And now that the training session is over, it's time to send our potential SPs into breakout rooms for their encounters. Each potential SP will have an opportunity to be interviewed by 2 different coordinators. Coordinators keep track of their own time, but as the facilitator, I help move things along by sending a broadcast message to all the breakout rooms when it's time to wrap up. How'd it go?
It went really well. That applicant was really good. I don't know. They must work at another school or something.
That's awesome. This is an opportunity. How did it go?
Oh, great. My SP had a really realistic cough.
Oh, that's a good sign.
Yeah.
And at this point, we're all going to finish our checklist. We can confer with each other if we have questions and get ready for the next one. Oh, how did it go?
That applicant was really good. They must work at another
Oh,
school.
that's fantastic. Oh, hey, Alba, how did it go?
Oh, my SP was great. They had a really realistic cough.
Huh. Okay, here we are. After both encounters, we're back in the main meeting room for a quick Q&A, an opportunity for you to ask us any questions you want about the job. So does anybody have any questions? All right, Q&A is over. All of the potential SPs have left the building. We are back in the main meeting room, just the coordinators. And this is where we're going to look at the scores on Learning Space and chat amongst ourselves. All right, and so that concludes our video. Hopefully you get it. Everything is crystal clear now. But what I would like to do is I just want to address a couple of questions that have come in on the Q&A before we move on to specific challenges. And there's a question here that says, can you break time per agenda item? Absolutely. So we give the orientation / training, that's usually about 30 to 45 minutes, depending on the number of people that are auditioning and how well prepared they are. We tend to find that if we have a lot of potential SPs who have worked at other schools and have a lot of experience, the training goes a little bit quicker. So 30 to 45 minutes. For the encounters, we try to keep it at about 10 minutes. The first encounters can take about 10 minutes. And then we need about 10 minutes to do our checklists and confer after that. The second encounters are a little bit longer just because we have some interview questions afterwards. So I would say 10 to 20 minutes, and then again, the 10 minutes afterwards for the coordinators to fill out their checklist and confer. And then we like to allow a half hour for the Q&A afterwards, but it does not tend to take that long. You know, again, just depending on the group, how many questions there are about the job and so on and so forth. So hopefully that answered your question. And I have another question here that I'm going to answer. Do you have a host solely in charge of moving everyone from room to room, like assigning breakout rooms, or does one of the coordinators also assume this role? Great question. Great question. That's going to come up a little bit later in challenges. But for these auditions, ideally, we would have had a facilitator solely in charge of navigating Zoom and moving people around, but that was not the case. The facilitator was also a coordinator and an interviewer, and we will talk about that in a little bit. So I think that
move on.
We will get to some more questions a little bit later, but let's move on to the challenges, shall we?
Sounds good.
Hi, everybody. My name is Raina. I'm one of the SP coordinators. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the challenges. We don't want you all to think that we just decided, hey, let's jump in and everything went perfectly and smoothly. There, of course, are always going to be challenges. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about and acknowledge is that you're going to lose some things in translation whenever you're used to doing something in person and then you switch to doing it via Zoom, right? So we all have that first impression of someone. We all pop in and say, okay, what are my gut instincts telling me? And that's a little bit more difficult to kind of gauge if you're doing something that is over the internet, obviously, right? So we're looking for people who are professional, who are thoughtful, who have that particular SP skill set. And because we work with them all the time, having the ability to meet them face to face helps us to kind of gauge that almost right off the bat, but via Zoom, again, that just isn't there. So some other things are sightlines. As Bob mentioned, we asked them to memorize their cases. Now, there was no way for us to know during Zoom whether or not they had the case there and they were reading off of it, or if they actually had followed directions. Some of the other things around performances is their dynamic range. For any of you who know or who have done it, performing in person is not the same thing as performing over a camera. So there's a little bit more lost in translation. We know that the applicants that we saw, we know where their dynamic acting range is via the camera, but in person, we're just going to have to see. Some of the other things are, of course, technical difficulties. Any of you who, I'm sure many of you have been working from home, and so you have an idea of what it is to lose connectivity. So fortunately for us, during the auditions, I don't think any of us had any connectivity issues, but some of the applicants did, and that's not something that we want to take into consideration when hiring. So that was a bit of a challenge. Some of the other technological challenges that we didn't necessarily expect are one of the assessors mentioned that they had more cognitive overload in doing the auditions this way. And I think for myself, it's just that you don't really think about the downtime that you get going from interviewing the applicant in the exam room. When you exit the exam room, you walk to the computer to be able to fill out their checklist on Learning Space. And in between that time, you're not having the stimuli from the computer. And so that little bit of downtime wasn't there. Some of the other things that we need to consider for our potential SPs are when we do this in person, we give a tour. We also are looking to see if they're coming prepared, if they have everything that they need with them. Will they want to be able to, will they be all right making the commute to the center? These are things, of course, you just can't do via Zoom. So those are some of the challenges.
And Brenda, if I could just jump in really quick, in regards to the technology challenge, I have to say that for our most recent auditions, I served as the facilitator and as a coordinator. And I will say it was a little bit stressful. you know, doing in-person interviews, I could go into the room, interview a candidate, walk out of the room, talk to everybody. I could give warnings. I'm doing this. That's a knock on the door, just to let everybody know, hey, time's up. And for whatever reason, using Zoom and doing this online, it was a little bit, there were more steps. I felt like I was interviewing somebody, and then I had to kind of like start typing broadcast messages to all the breakout rooms, 5 minutes remaining. And I felt a little bit in two places at once. So if I had to do it all over again, I would not choose to do both roles at the same time.
Yeah, and with that, I will share that the cognitive load, and it might have just because it was a new process, it was a lot to have to assess someone and then also figure out how to get back to the room or how to pull up the checklist, et cetera. So I think that would get better over time, but it was true for this time. So yeah.
Thank you guys, definitely. However, all in all, we did find this process to be rewarding. If you would advance the slide, please. So the rewards were that, you know, we took this kind of beast of a task and we broke it down and we figured out a way to do it. And we were able to have the auditions and avoid our HR overload. It ended up being something that was relatively convenient. We were able to maintain our workflow, which for me was stabilizing considering the state of what's going on with everything. We were able to keep a little bit of normalcy. Also, you know, it never hurts to save some trees. We were able to do this 100% online, which was something that we felt was definitely a reward. And we're able to start a rapport with our new hires and really keep things rolling. Also, one of the assessors reported that they felt like some aspects were actually easier, such as filling out checklists, rather than having to have some things on paper and some things that were on the computer, which is how we had been doing it in person. So overall, a rewarding experience. If you would advance the slide, please. So we're interested to see what it is we're going to end up keeping. We're really glad that we were able to find out that our process was more versatile than perhaps we had considered it before, pretty easy to modify for the trainings. We're interested to see whether or not the folks who went through this audition process will be more ready for telehealth. We're not sure what's going to come up in the days ahead. We're thinking that we might end up doing more telehealth than perhaps we did before. And so we might find that this process prepares SPs even better for that kind of encounter. Even if we don't end up doing telehealth more, this is more convenient. If we find that we have an applicant who for whatever reason can't make it to the in-person auditions, but we still want them to be able to apply and interview, then we can always pull this out. We're curious to see what SP readiness is going to look like in person. We're used to going through this process, and when our applicants come in, they've basically done everything in the center that we're going to ask them to do. So they come in relatively ready, and we're wondering how the Zoom auditions are going to translate for that. Also, we're interested in finding out just overall what our SP's general sense of doing the audition this way is. Will they be as comfortable with us? Will they be as ready to answer questions and that kind of thing? So overall rewarding and some interesting considerations to look forward to in the future. So the only other thing I have for you all is, what are your questions? Let's go ahead and see, from what I've explained as far as the challenges, is there anything in particular that you're curious about? Any part of the process that didn't quite make sense to you all?
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Linda. So I've been kind of looking at questions along with Laura here. We're all trying to look at the ones that you've asked so far. Great questions, thank you very much for those. So one of the questions that came up was about with the hiring and the what happens with HR. Specifically, can we translate all the hiring process to an online process with the HR for the documents and things? And Bob, I don't know if you have a handle on that.
Yeah, so I think thanks, Joe, for the question. Yes, some of the documents are online, which is great. But the final step, HR requires everyone to come in person. So that last step with the W-9, all that kind of stuff has to be done at the university. So yeah.
Okay, and there's a great question about what's happening with our SPs now that we're in this situation. Are they becoming disinterested, and are we doing anything for SPs right now? And I think that's a really nice question. One thing that we implemented early on was a lunchtime Zoom meeting that we invited everybody to. We just kind of hung out there, and people could pop in and meet with us and chat with us and just kind of get a little face-to-face to see how everybody was doing and how they were coping. And we have been continuing working with a lot of our programs have gone online, and so we're keeping some of our SPs quite busy with some Zoom projects.
I also know that we have tried to create work for our SPs. So we have created, Christine had the idea that what about trigger videos? Because our SPs are such great actors. So we created a quick trigger video, and then the College of Medicine was like, great. And so then we're doing more of those. And I think Christine, you had another comment about something.
Actually, I wanted to clarify for the person who asked that question. Was your question about what do the potential SPs do while they're hanging out in the waiting room during the audition process? Or was it, how are we keeping our current SPs engaged?
I think both of those questions were asked. So yeah, I believe. So when the SPs are in the potential SPs are in the waiting room, they're just waiting. And I'm not sure if they have their videos or audios on at the time.
We also
No, yeah, they're just hanging out. It's a way for us to sort of wait until everybody shows up, and then we can admit them into the main meeting room all at once, as opposed to one by one, and then having sort of like an awkward kind of like, hey, how's it going? It gives the coordinators just a little bit more time to get prepared before greeting everyone.
nice buffer.
Also, I just want to mention to everyone, if you see a question that's already been asked and you click the thumbs up on the side, it'll bump that question up to the top so that we'll see it readily.
Yeah,
Somebody asked real quick about trigger videos. I'll just address that before we move on to the other questions with respect to the Zoom auditions. So Bob, you mentioned that we were creating some trigger videos. What we're doing is looking at creating a library of very short, about 2 minutes or less videos that would represent the opening statement of a telehealth encounter. And most of the trigger videos we're creating are around the very large fallout of COVID-19. So mental health issues and grief issues and all of those things. We are hiring our SPs, giving a very loose script to say, this is the kind of tone and these are the kind of issues we would like you to raise during this 2-minute opening statement. And then use that trigger video as a jumping off point for live discussion with learners.
Okay, I'm just going to take a shot at answering some questions here.
Yeah.
So someone asked, would you be willing to share the materials you use in your SP interviews? So feel free to email us and we can send you those materials.
Mm-hmm.
Someone asked, what platforms do you use to advertise your audition dates, and do you manage to find enough people for the roles? Wow, I feel like that is the $1 million question, right? How do we get these people? And we have found that using our SPs, our current active SPs, is our best resource. And so because they understand the job, they know what it is that we're looking for. And so whenever we are wanting to have interviews and auditions. We reach out to our current roster and say, hey, here's what we're looking for. Please send people our way. In the past, we've auditioned in papers and through other sources, flyers, things like that. But as of right now, we feel like word of mouth with our current SP roster is the best way to go. And we're still working on increasing diversity. And so that's something that we are continuing to make a priority.
And here's a really good question. Someone wrote, I missed most of the presentation. I'm sure you presented the criteria against which you measure potential SPs, but will that information be available subsequent to the presentation? And yes, absolutely. We have recorded this presentation. And so if you go to our website, you can watch this all again without any issue. I hope that answers your question.
Someone asked, did you pay the potential SPs? So no, we did not pay anyone to be auditioned. If, you know, once we hire them and then they come in for training, we would pay them for that.
Yeah, so I have an interesting comment here from Virginia. I'm not sure of your last name, DRDA. And Virginia said, perhaps there could be an alternate Zoom group activity to uncover some interpersonal and group dynamics otherwise lost in translations, which I thought was a really cool idea. Virginia, I'm gonna allow you to talk. Do you have any ideas about this? Oh no, I scared her off. Virginia, would you like to speak? I think this is a go ahead, Virginia.
So while we're waiting for Virginia, if you want to say something, go ahead and jump right in. I'm looking at Blair's question. In the Q&A, Laura mentioned in-person red flags that might be missed in Zoom. What are some of those red flags? So as I talked about with challenges, since they're asked to memorize their cases, that's something that you can see in person, whether or not that case is memorized, that you can flub it a little bit. You can, you know, cheat a little bit on Zoom. If you decide that you want to have your case up on your computer while you're Zooming with us, there's no way for us to know that. So that's a red flag that we wouldn't be able to catch via Zoom.
So there was a suggestion that was given by someone about that you can actually have the applicant take their camera, show the room, and obviously they could pull something out, you know, without us knowing about it. But yeah, I'm gonna check back in with Virginia because you are unmuted if you want to share your ideas. But okay, I think it's a great idea. And I think that it's definitely something to think about. What are those activities that we can create to check on group dynamics? So thank you, Virginia.
And if I could speak to other red flag things, I mean, when you meet somebody in person, you can find out how they interact in person with you. Are they a close talker? Are they, you know, do they have hygiene issues? Is there anything, you know, do they seem to have trouble speaking up in a group or asking questions? I mean, you can kind of figure that out better in person than you can over the Zoom.
Great. I think we have time for about one more question. Anyone?
There's a question that's in the chat about who to email to get the hiring materials.
And we will be providing our emails, so you can email any of us, and any of us would be happy to do that. So I'm going to actually share my screen real quick with my PowerPoint, and we will go ahead and conclude this. These are great questions. Keep them coming. We love talking about all this stuff, so please email us. Happy to do that. So obviously we did the questions. So we have some, so as Christine mentioned at the beginning, we have our webinar series, Navigating Uncharted Waters, Simulation in the Age of COVID-19. So our next webinar is next week, next Wednesday, same time, Effective Rapport Building Through the Barrier of Virtual Conversation. I've been a part of some of those meetings, and it's gonna be a really cool webinar. I actually can't wait for it. So, and also we are collaborating with our friends at the University of Minnesota. Friday, May 8th from 11 to 12 Central Time, we're going to be doing a webinar on navigating leadership in the COVID-19 response. So Please join us for both of those. Both are promising to be quite exciting, and we're hoping to have great discussions. So please join us. And that is the end of our presentation. So all of us want to thank you. You have all of our emails there. Please reach out. Any last words from anybody?
I have a question.
Please.
Bob, do we have a few minutes to stay on afterwards to address any lingering questions?
Usually not, but for this group, because they were so good, we will wait. We will do questions. So actually, we'll open everything up. So yes, go ahead and type questions in the Q&A, and we'll keep answering questions.
So it looks like Virginia was still trying to unmute. I wonder if we could try it one more time.
Yeah, let's try it. Let me see. I get marked. Virginia, allow it to talk. All right, unmute. I think Virginia has to, there. So it says you're unmuted, Virginia. So sorry, technology.
Yeah, right.
We'll leave you unmuted, so if you do find a way to do it, then just pop in. So, other questions? Let's start.
Someone asked, do you plan on training these new SPs using Zoom and having them start joining Zoom/online sessions? I think that's a great plan. It really depends on when these new SPs, how long it takes for the HR process to get them on board and where we will be in this whole pandemic. My guess is that, yes, we will probably start using Zoom a lot more, and perhaps that's going to be part of the curriculum and just something for us to think about moving forward.
Agree.
Joe Miller had a great question about thoughts. What are some of our thoughts on potential new SPs who could be missed or marginalized by this process, but otherwise who would make wonderful additions to our program?
Right. That's a great question. Great thought.
Yeah.
I don't think we're ever going to just stop having in-person auditions. So anyone who perhaps doesn't have access to this type of technology definitely would have an opportunity to come in person.
We have definitely had discussions, though, about technology ability with the SPs. So I think that, especially as our program grows, we have different needs for SPs, and not every SP needs to be able to do everything. So, but I agree with you, Joe. That's a great thought.
And I think it's also part of a larger question that we need to put our heads towards, because even with in-person auditions, there are people that we would potentially like to reach who might not be able to come in as easily. Thinking about disability as one potential group, or we talked about working with people with, I think it was Down syndrome, Bob. So people who would need their parents or their caregivers to bring them in for auditions and things that become much more complicated. So it's a great question for us to put our heads to.
Yeah, great one.
Someone asked, what's the minimum pass score an SP needs to achieve to make it through the process? So we actually, I don't know if we have a minimum pass score. We rate them so we can see kind of what the range of the scores is. And depending on our demographic needs, we can have sort of like a fluid scoring. You know, if let's say someone doesn't maybe make the top 10, but it is a demographic that we very, very, very desperately need, and the score was good enough, then we might, you know, take that into consideration. I think it's very easy once we look in Learning Space to see the difference. I mean, people that just don't get it and don't do well, their scores, it is really reflected in the scores. And so it makes it easy to sort of figure out who we want to hire.
Yeah, and the nice thing about these, that's great, Laura. And the nice thing about this process is that, as Laura said, if there's a demographic that we really need, it's not saying that these scores eliminate someone right off the bat, but rather it lets us know what kind of work we need to put into this SP to allow them to be successful. So, and to answer your question, around 80% with learning space is kind of where we see the cutoff around that. So, yeah.
Hi, my name is Valerie. I had posted just some questions about the backgrounds and the equipment used by the SPs. So we had SP day last week where we used standardized patients, and it was really awkward in dealing with, some of them used cell phones, some of them used computers, some of them had virtual backgrounds, so it looked like they were at a beach, and some of them had weird backgrounds that they were using, you know, that were just at their house. I wondered if you guys were trying to standardize that for your SPs.
The answer is that we're very aware of the backgrounds because we do trainings with them on how to use them, and I'll let the coordinators answer more specifically, but we're very aware of that and standardized that it has to be kind of a neutral background, as in there's nothing that would distract from the learner's experience. Anything else to add, coordinators?
Yeah, I think we were fortunate that most of our, I can't even say most, for the programs that I've run thus far, all of the SPs were able to find a blank wall, even if it's, you know, wherever they are in their house. There's typically somewhere that they can just have a blank wall behind them. And that seemed to work well for standardization.
Great.
So Gretchen Lair is asking, given the financial considerations during this time, that some schools are experiencing a hiring freeze. So far, that has not come down the pike for us. And we are well aware that it might. So we are proceeding the best we can with the current information that we have. But yeah, so far that we have not heard anything about a hiring freeze.
An anonymous attendee asked, do you ever do alternative trainings, auditions with people who cannot make the scheduled days of training auditions? If you do, how do you go about that type of process? The answer is yes, especially when we need people or it's a demographic. I think going back to the beginning of the presentation, we look at, is there information about the candidate that we actually know? So maybe it's a close friend of someone. So we know this skill set this person has, but this we're not sure about. So sometimes we'll tailor our audition process, but for the most part, I would say probably 90% of the time, we will put them through, you know, the audition process that we just laid out here, because it is proven to us to really indicate those SPs who will be successful. So, great. The question requirements. Okay, great. I think that we're just kind of, the silence is us going through your
Yeah,
questions.
we're good.
Great. Okay. Explain about the trigger videos. Awesome. Okay, some more duplicates. Great.
Whether we send the SPs an agenda before the Zoom meeting, and absolutely we give them, we kind of let them know how it's going to work out before they come. And then there's an orientation with them once they arrive with the main facilitator. We all pop in and say hello and just give them an idea of what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And Elizabeth asked, what about when they're in the waiting room while the team is meeting to discuss the breakouts? So they're just kind of hanging out there. They can't talk amongst themselves or see each other in the waiting room. The waiting room is just a screen that says, you know, you're in the waiting room and this will begin shortly.
Mm-hmm.
Great. There's some great comments in here too.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing all your thoughts.
One question that came up a couple times was about now are we limited to geographics because of the Zoom? Can we hire people from other places? That's very interesting. Something I didn't even consider.
Great question. Yeah. Good. Awesome. Oh, okay. So Jenny's okay.
Jenny.
I'm gonna go find you, and I will allow to talk. And I have unmuted you. I tried to.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yay.
Gosh, I think I just experienced what you all did when you were. I logged out of my work screen and got into my personal. Anyway, all that aside, this is such a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. The thought that I had about creating some sort of icebreaker group activity was possibly just posing a question to the whole gallery as to a question we sometimes use in real-time auditions is, what is the most boring thing you did today? Which always creates sort of a funny way for them to approach something that is kind of banal and simple, but always brings some laughter, and you see who chimes in. So you might see who your extrovert introverts might be, but try to really make all of them offer something. So that was one thought I had, or just posing some sort of icebreaking question and have them in a group in that way.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Great idea, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. There's a lot of things to be working with. So it's about 11:56, so let's take one more question so that we can end this right at noon. If we do have another question, I think we do probably. Anybody want to grab one?
There's a question here that says, our LS learning space is through intranet only. What was your protocol for remote access to the software? And I'm not sure I follow completely.
Ours is not, so we can access it off campus. That has its own challenges sometimes. We have to definitely be using the disabled learner data entry. We also, for our cases, enable the input data from IP address, whatever it may be. During these times, it's been a little harder. So, but to answer your question, your immediate question, we can access it. So, great. Then I think that's it. So again, thank you so much for attending. Those who stayed for questions, thanks for all the great questions and comments. Anything else from anybody? Okay.
Careful out there.
Right.
Be
Hope to see
careful
you
out
all
there.
next week.
Yes. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.